Hey everybody, today I'm going to be doing a lot of work on my rear wheel because I ran into a few problems when taking it apart to polish it. Ended up having to weld a bolt to one of the fasteners to extract it from the brake side and replacing inner sleeve, all the bearings, the pucks, everything, and this is going to be the process of reassembly that I'm about to show you. So thanks for watching. Okay, here's all the components that we need to reassemble the rear wheel. I've got the rear pulley, a compensator bowl in the hardware, a brand new rear disc rotor, my axle, a brand new axle sleeve, brand new pulley bearings, brand new wheel bearings, brand new insert pucks, and brand new hardware to mount the disc rotor. So we're going to be doing an install today on the rear wheel. I'm going to do a lot of cuts to keep out the boring assembly part, but the next thing I'm going to show you is the pressing tool that I made out of things that you can buy at Tractor Supply. It's pretty easy to just hook it into your vise and press in bearings. I don't recommend pounding them in. It's so much better to press them into a clean surface. And so we'll get going on that. Thanks. Okay, so right here we've got the bearing pressing tool that I made out of parts that you can find from Tractor Supply. And it's basically a 1-inch threaded rod with corresponding nuts, some big washers with 1-inch inside diameter, and another slightly smaller washer with a 1-inch inside diameter, and that'll be used to press the inside of the bearing on the pulley, as I'll be able to show you. Okay, so here I've got my threaded rod set up. This is going to allow me to pull the bearing out of the rear wheel pulley, and I'm going to zoom in here. You see this piece that I made right here on top of the nut that's caught in the jaws of the vise has two purposes. I made that as a support for pulling the neck bearings, so that's something you could keep in mind for future use. You can see I cut a notch in it, I filed it down, it's got a lip on it with an edge, and it's got two uses, so I can use it for pulling wheel bearings and I can use it for pulling neck bearings. Okay, so in order to press a bearing into the rear sprocket pulley, we're going to first have to pull the old bearing. So I've got the base of the puller presser set up right here, and I'm going to demonstrate how you can very easily and very safely, without warping anything, pull a bearing using Tractor Supply parts. Okay, we're going to want to lubricate in between the washers that we use so they can slip easier and you don't bind anything. We're going to use this section of plumbing pipe, believe it or not. Slip that over there, and the bearing's going to fall right into this plumbing pipe. First, we're going to take our 1-inch inside diameter washer with the same size diameter as the internal set of the rear wheel pulley. We're going to run this down here. Okay. Then we're going to run the pulley down. Okay. So that's set inside the washer. There we go. Now this is going to allow, when I tighten here with these other pieces that I'm going to use, it's going to allow that bearing to just come straight out. Now I've got a couple more washers here, and I've already lubricated them with PB Blaster so that things slip real well. What I'm going to use here is a piece of plumbing pipe that goes over the top of that side of the bearing. I'm going to back that with a couple washers here. I'm going to run this nut down here. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is give the outside of the bearing a shot of PB Blaster. That'll penetrate and allow it to slip out of the housing a lot easier. Okay, so as you can see, I've got the nut run all the way down this threaded rod. And all I need to do now is take a 1.5 inch wrench and very gently collapse this until the bearing pulls itself out. And you can see it's released already. Okay, I think we've got it. This threaded rod is a very thick thread on it, so it doesn't take much. I'll come back to you after I've pulled that nut off and we'll see our bearing free. So I pulled the nut off of this threaded rod, and we're going to pull these two washers off. And we're going to pull this pipe coupler off. And we're going to see, here's your bearing, totally free. Completely pressed out effortlessly. And all it takes is a couple washers, a couple nuts, and a threaded rod, and a pipe coupling from Tractor Supply, and you could save yourself about $40 in shop time. And then I'll show you how I can use the same pieces from Tractor Supply to press the new bearing in, nice and easy. Okay, so incidentally, this specialized nut that I made painstakingly with a file also serves as a jam nut, so that I can lock this into the vise and have it locked down so this threaded rod doesn't twist while I'm in the vise. So now this bearing is going to go in the opposite way that the old one came out, but we want to work from the top down. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a couple of backing washers here. Okay. And we're going to take our pulley and place it over those washers. Okay, so I've got our double row pulley bearing, part number 40433-01. Now this is different than the wheel bearings, and there aren't a lot of places that you can source this on the aftermarket, so you have to go to Harley for it. Go to your local Harley-Davidson dealership and order it. If you've got a, I believe it's a 2002 to 2005 VRod, this bearing will fit your pulley. So I'll unwrap this and show you how we're going to press it in to the pulley. Okay, so I've got our pulley supported by two of the large washers that are lubricated with PB Blaster, so things can slip if they need to. We're going to take our new double row sealed bearing from Harley-Davidson. Okay, so you see I've got my bearing set lightly in the pulley. I've got my two washers which are lubricated in between, holding the bearing down. And I'm going to run the large nut all the way down this threaded rod, and we're going to easily press the bearing right into the pulley. Okay, so the nuts run down here onto the threaded rod. We're going to take our 1.5 inch big wrench. We're just going to ease that bearing right in. No need to go too fast. Just ease it right in, nice and level. Now there is a little lip or shelf, whatever you want to call it, inside the pulley here. So once we reach that point, we're done. Okay, so using the same Tractor Supply source threaded rod, nut, and washer system, we're going to press the new wheel bearings into my wheel. So in addition to the pair of all balls 1-inch inside diameter wheel bearings made for the 2002 to 2005 model years, part number 20-1017-2RS, we'll be installing into the wheel. I also bought a brand new inner sleeve for the axle, part number 43704-01. My old sleeve was very rusty on the outside, not the inside. I always use Never-Seez compound on the inside, but I'm also going to coat the outside so that it doesn't get rusty from whatever kind of elements that get inside that wheel. Okay, so I've got my Tractor Supply threaded rod assembly set up to be able to install the bearings in the rear wheel. And per the manual, you install the brake side bearing first, so that's what we're going to do. Now I've got my brand new inner axle sleeve right here, and so what I'm going to do first is fill this thing with Never-Seez compound so I don't forget to do it later, but we're also going to run this down over that threaded rod just to make sure the wheel is true and level on that rod before I install the bearing. This stuff gets everywhere. You'll find it in my ear, in my hair, on my pants, on the floor. Go say, I'm just gonna place this sleeve gently down here. We've already got our washer set up with our nut to back it, and I'm going to lift the rear wheel into place. And as per the manual, we're going to install this with, I don't know if you can see it here, but the lettering side out. There's a little bit of lettering right inside that inner race. So we're going to slip this bearing down over our threaded rod here. Make sure that the wheel's seated properly. Start the bearing in its seat. Now you want to be pressing these bearings from the outside rim. So we're going to take our large washers with a little bit of lubrication in between. Run them down here. And then our large nut. Install that over the top. And I'm just going to take a real quick shot of glass cleaner. Spray this on the wheel bearing here. That'll help it slip in. And it'll evaporate when it's done, unlike some penetrating lubricant or something like that, which will stay in there and, in my opinion, make the bearing slip. So we're going to take our large 1.5 inch wrench and just work on this wheel bearing until it makes full contact. It doesn't take much force, and because of that, you'll know when it's all the way in. We're definitely getting there, and this process ensures that you get a full complete seat in the housing without warpage, without cracking, and there we go, we're in. Okay, so my mistake, I had the video camera on pause instead of record. I've already installed the brake side numbers out wheel bearing. Then I slipped the wheel over the top of the threaded rod. I lubricated the inside of the inner axle sleeve with never sees compound. I lubricated the outside of the inner axle sleeve with grease to keep it from rusting. And I slipped the wheel over the top of that. Then I slipped the bearing into place. As you can see here in this video segment, I have already pressed the bearing into place, so now you're just going to watch me easily remove this nut after having pressed it into place. The bearing is completely flush with the outside mating surface. And one thing you want to do to make sure is you can see this threaded rod is very dark. It's very much lubricated with anti-seize compound, so that when you slip, this is a 1-inch outside diameter rod. It's actually a little smaller, so it can accommodate the nut, but this is a 1-inch inside diameter bearing, so you want to make sure that that doesn't bind on this rod as you're moving it up and down as you install it. I filled the wells edges with new RTV, and I installed the inserts. Some people call them pucks. I'm going to let that dry for a little while, and then I'll move on to installing the brake disc rotor. I did go around the outer edge and clean off any of the old RTV and any of the new RTV where it was staining the outside edge of the hub there with a disc brake rotor seats. So T-45 Torx bit socket installed, and my torque wrench, which per the manual is set to 30 to 38 foot-pounds. I set it at 38. I always like to go tighter at the maximum. And we're going to put that disc brake on now. Numbers out. It says to install the fasteners in cross-hatched order, crisscross order, and torque them in sequence. There's one. There's 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I'll just double check them all. Good. 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 And good. Apply a little bit of green thread locker to the fasteners. Okay, so I've got the fasteners finger tightened on the compensating bowl, and now we're going to go in with a 7/16 12-point socket, and once we've got them in place, we're going to be tightening to 55 foot-pounds as per the manual.
I do that for 8 times.
The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our cush drive and we're going to coat it in some glass cleaner. That's what they use to recommend to lubricate the installation here. Seat that properly. When I removed the axle from the motorcycle, I placed the spacers in the exact order as they were installed when I took it apart so that I would know exactly how to put them back together again. So we've got a smaller spacer on the outside. We've got this spacer which gets seated right here against the bearing in the compensating bowl. And then we've got this even smaller spacer on the brake side. And then there's a little ring washer here that goes on the end of the axle to make sure that that nut never comes off. So there we have it. And again, next to an actual chrome piece, that Flitz really does a great job. So I've got my tire, wheel, pulley, spacers, chamfer, nut, and split ring laid out. What we're going to do is coat this rear axle with some VRSCA compound prior to installing the rear wheel. Now what we're going to do is gently shift this wheel past the brake caliper. Now there's a little notch in this spacer. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but that goes to the outside. Make sure everything lines up properly and the brake is seated on the rotor here. There we go. It slipped in place. Great. There we go. I think it's lined up good enough that I can run my axle through. Well, maybe not just yet. There we go, we're going to send it through. So this nut takes a 15/16 socket, and I use a 1/2-inch drive. And it is through. Now we're going to lift the wheel and put our chamfers into place properly to get the right belt tension. There we go, the belt's seated properly now. And I have a mark on each one of my chamfers where I like it to be. So that's what I'm going to go with, because I use a 26-tooth front sprocket. And proper tension is not achieved with the manual setting. Okay, there I am. "105 foot-pounds" is what the book says for proper axle nut tightness. Torque to 105 foot-pounds. There's 100, and there's 5. There we go, 105 foot-pounds. And all my lines are lining up where I like the belt to be properly tensed. It feels good to me. And the feeling of the bearings, by rotating it, everything feels pretty smooth. The rear brake is dragging a little bit, but that's because the disc is brand new. And the last thing we do is we put on our little split ring here, right on the end of the axle, so this nut will never come off. Well, there we have it, everybody. A fresh wheel, fresh bearings all around. Nicely polished. I'll have to polish it again because I got Never Cease compound all over it. But I'm good to go and I'm ready to ride this year. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And remember, everybody, nobody gets out of here alive!